Hi, it's Miss Lisa from the St. Paris Public Library. We are continuing on with our chapter book, Guardians of Ga'Hoole, The Rise of a Legend. This is night number 3. We've had some technical difficulty, but I'm not a quitter, so we're going to forge ahead and continue to read this book, even if it goes into next week. So our schedules with our online chapter books for just before bed might be off just a little bit by a week, but we're still going to continue on with the Guardians of Ga'Hoole. So tonight we're going to start in chapter 10. Lysa. Toward the end of the blinding snow, we returned from visiting Thora one evening to find Gundifur quite excited. She was almost bouncing up and down on the nest. It's rocking, she exclaimed. The egg is rocking. I was suddenly very frightened. Oh, is that bad? What does it mean? It's not bad at all. It means the chick is about to hatch. Really? I was overwhelmed with excitement. Until now, that egg had been the most boring thing in the world. Get off! Let me see! I shouted. Gundiford lifted one leg delicately and tipped sideways, supporting herself on her starboard wing so I could have a peek beneath the bald spot on her belly. The egg was jiggling just the tiniest bit, and every once in a while it actually rocked. We waited through the night, me driving Gundifur mad with my questions. Every 2 seconds I asked if the egg was rocking again. I was hopping from one foot to the other. Quit jumping around so much, Gundifur scolded. I'm not jumping. I'm inspiring her. Him, whoever. I even made up a little song to entice the chick to come out. Jump, jump, bump, bump. Wouldn't it be something if you just start thumping? A little crack is all you need, no wider than a tiny seed. It's much more fun outside than in. Now crack that egg, let the party begin. Oh, great glocks, Gundifur's large yellow eyes opened very wide. I think you have inspired something. I feel the egg tooth. Time to get off. Gundifur began raising herself off the nest very slowly, very gracefully, as if she were about to softly take flight. When she was finally off, she gave a little flip of her head, inviting me to step up to the nest. No loud noises, she whispered. We want the chick to be able to concentrate. This is the hardest work it has ever had to do. What work? I asked. The egg tooth. Don't you see it poking through? I peered. That little thing? I was glistening. It was a glistening bead no bigger than a dewdrop peeking up from inside the egg, but it was attached to something that was alive. It was moving. Is it really a tooth? Well, they call it that, but no. It is just a little pointy bump on the top of the chick's beak. It's only used for this one single purpose, to crack the egg, and will drop off in a few days after the chick hatches. I gasped. Don't worry, Gundifur said. I'll find it. I always do. Broodies are good at finding egg teeth. Did you find mine? Of course I did. Didn't I say I always found them? Is this chick ever going to get out? I muttered. It's taking a rest right now. You must be patient. As I said, this is the hardest thing this little critter has ever had to do. Twix time was coming on. The light in the hollow had changed. I began to yawn. Indeed, I might have been half asleep when suddenly there was a crackling followed by a soft plop. She's here, Gundifur exclaimed. Was I asleep? How could you let me fall asleep? What a charmer, I gasped. She was, well, frankly, sort of a disaster. Is she breathing? I asked. Of course she is. Aren't you, sweetie? Gundifur tweeted. So what I can only describe as a web blob. Come close, dear. Take a look at your little new sister. I was frightened. I took one tiny step. My gizzard was fluttering like my plummels in the crosswind. Now let me tell you something. The closer I came to the nest, the more nervous I got. Something deeper was stirring, a realization that this was it. A newly hatched chick is not a thing of beauty, but is a thing of love. My sister Lysa was pure love. Oh, I began to sputter. My gizzard had never been so stirred. I could not utter the words to express my joy, my admiration, my passion for this little wet creature, still streaked in the threads of blood from the yolk. She was covered with strange little swirls of wet fuzz. Her bare flesh showed through, and her eyes were sealed shut and looked like outsized bumps on her face. Gunderford gave a mighty belch, and out came some partially digested vole. Been saving that one for you, darling. Your first meal. Is that what she eats? Throw up? It's easy on their tummies. She eats that along with the first slime from her eggshell. Chicks can't really make pellets yet. I opened my beak and tried to belch, but only a little squeak issued forth. Oh dear, I don't think I have any of that mouse left. It's already packed in a pellet for yarping. Next time, just save some. Don't let it go to your gizzard too fast. You can do that? Oh yes, if you concentrate. I must have looked very close to despair, for Gunderford extended a wing and stroked me. Don't worry, there'll be many more chances. This is what she'll eat until her first insect. I had a battery of questions. My beak couldn't keep up with my brain. When will her eyes open? Not for a while, 10 nights or more, and let's hope at night. Why? Oh, daylight is much too harsh, and it's bad luck to open your eyes in the daylight. Nighttime is owl time. That was all I needed to hear. I became insanely diligent watching over little Lisa. I was absolutely obsessed with the idea that she should not open her eyes in the daytime. I like to think I'm a rational bird, but all reason went out of the hollow when I heard this. Of course, I had no idea what I would do if she did open her eyes during daylight, clamp my talons over them, and maybe injure her by accident. Moss's siblings hatched out soon after Lisa. All 3 were little females, much to his disappointment. I thought I would get at least one male out of the clutch, he grumbled. Well, now Lisa can have 3 little girlfriends. It'll be nice for them. They'll entertain each other, and we can go off. I nodded in the direction of the secret forge. What with all this hatching, it had been a while since we had visited Thora, and we had promised to come back. I really didn't want to leave until Lisa opened her eyes. I wanted to be the first face she saw. Maybe it was selfish. Maybe I had delusions of importance. But I was, in fact, her only blood relative around, even though Gunderford was her broody and still brooding her, for a naked little chick has nothing to protect it from the cold, and we were getting the first of the Dreifafif chenille, the kind of snow that clings to feathers. With it came very cold temperatures and some snurlish winds. Several nights after Lisa's hatched, I had just yarped some white-footed mouse for her when I noticed a flitter beneath the skin that covered her eyes. Gunderford, look, I think her eyes are... First one eye slit open, and then 2 or 3 seconds later, seemed like forever, the other one opened, and a tiny voice muttered a single word. Again? She can talk. Of course she can, Gilda slithered over. She's heard all of us talking for the last, what has it been, 9 nights? Again? Lisa said again. Again what? I asked. Mouseth, she sighed. When she spoke, she had a slight lisp. It was the cutest thing ever. Tired of Mouseth. No vole? She paused. Please, flies. My heart seized. My gizzard lurched when I heard her speak my name. You know my name? Yeth, you my big brother. I blinked, but the tears wouldn't stop. Don't cry, Lisa chirped. I love you. I's not for crying. She opened her own so wide and began swiveling her head around like an old pro. You, Gilda? She said, then flipped her head upside down and backwards. And you, my broody, Gundi. She took a big breath. I love, 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 love all you. Lisa began to grow in leaps and bounds. She was the fluffiest fuzzball ever, and each day there was a new achievement. She had her first insect ceremony, then first meat, I could hardly tear myself away from her to go visit Thora, but we did sneak off occasionally. I understand about little sisters, Thora paused and seemed to gulp. We thought she was about to say something, but she turned back to her work. You know, they grow very quickly. You should make a chart. A chart? Yes. Go over to my kindling pile and each of you take a big piece of birch bark and then fetch yourself a nice charred piece of wood and you'll have a marker. Now what? Moss asked. Start marking down what your sisters do. You mean they're sky marks? I asked, for that is the word we use for significant events in a growing owlet's life, even before they can fly. Yes, you know, when they hatch, when they eat, followed by their first yarbed pellet. It was a wonderful idea, and Moss and I both started the charts for our sisters. Can I put 3 on one chart? Moss asked. I wouldn't if I were you, Thora advised. They each deserve their own sky marks chart. I looked at Thora. She was an uncommonly intelligent owl, and not that much older than we were, but somehow vastly more mature. Chapter 11, A Visit from Tatya Hanja. That day I returned to the hollow, close to Twix time, and Lysa woke up. Lize, that you? Of course. Why are you awake? I've got this funny feeling in my tummy. You do? Yes, ever since my first meet last night. You do. I was terribly excited. I had arrived just in time with my chart. Don't panic, Lysa. Stay calm. I am calm. This is nothing to worry about. I took a big breath. You are about to yarp your first pellet. I thought it might be something like that. I think I'm budging too. I just didn't want to wake up Gundi. We'll help you, dear, Gilda said. Now, here's what we do, I said. I'm going to lead you to the very edge of the hollow. You have to lean out and open your mouth very wide. Lysa followed me to the portal, and I helped her to the ledge just outside. Oh my, it's so beautiful. The snow looks pink. It's dawn snow. Sipa Shini. This is so exciting. I've never been up this late. I've never seen the day, she paused. I've never seen the night, for that matter. I've just heard about stars and the moon. Look, there's one star left over from the night. That's the light bringer, the morning star. The one that climbs into the dawn before the sun rises. It's lovely. I never thought there would be lovely things that were part of the day. I thought it was only the night that hatched beautiful treasures like stars and moonlight. You won't be able to see the light bringer for long, not after the sun rises. But now you must concentrate on that pellet. How's it coming? Oh, that, she replied dismissively. Not oh that, this is important. We'll mark it on your chart. Come on now, this is your chance to show how grown up you are. Open your beak really wide, I urged her. Lysa opened her beak as wide as she could. Now you're ready to yarp, I said. Make a little hiccup. That's it. Go for it. It's coming. I can hear it rumbling. Something flew out of her mouth. You did it, I exclaimed. Where'd it go? Down there, a nice plump pellet. When you start to eat the meat on bones with fur, all your pellets will even be bigger. Oh my glocks, I might not be up to a really big pellet. Of course you will. Lysa looked down, trying to spot where the pellet had landed. You want me to fetch it? We'll show Gundifer when she wakes up. What a lovely idea, Gilda said. I'll go down and get it. I heard a flapping sound in the distance. That's rather loud, I thought. A dread spread through my gizzard. Lysa must have picked up on it. What is it, Lize? She asked. What is it? A familiar voice hooted like a slightly distorted echo. Oh, glocks. It was Tatya Hanja. I saw Gilda freeze in her tracks. Go away, I wanted to screech, but she was our aunt. Oh, my goodness. What an adorable little owlet, Hanja said. I just yarped my first pellet, Lysa said. She tucked her wings behind her and swung her tail back and forth a bit. She was so proud. Oh, melt my gizzard, cooed Tatya Hanja. Gilda had climbed back up the tree with the pellet coiled in her tail. Do come in, she said politely, then gave me a rather sharp nudge with her head, as if scolding me for getting my manners. Yes, do come in, I repeated. So happy to see you, I lied. Any voles? White-footed mice? She asked as we entered the hollow. I love the voles from this woods. They're very sweet. Have I mentioned that Tachahanja was a bit of a mooch? She always traveled with the Botkin and happily received any gifts that owls bestowed on her, and they bestowed many in an effort to get rid of her quickly. No white-footed mice, but I'd be happy to get you some, I said quickly. Usually when I went out hunting, I went bare talon, but I knew Tachahanja was an incredibly nosy old screech, always poking about the hollow under the guise of nest keeping, as she had just begun to do. Oh, Gilda, I think you missed some inchworms in that corner, she called. I didn't want her poking around my battle claws, and I discovered the caps had been disguised with sharp tips. So I put them on. Your training claws, Lies. How handsome. You wear them for white mice? Hardly seems worth the effort. I need all the practice I can get. You'll make a wonderful cadet. When do you go to the academy? Not soon enough, I wanted to say. Sofenissen, I replied. Spring. Well, that's not too far off. This little one might be flying by then. I hope so. I couldn't wait until Lysa could fly. In a few weeks, when the snow wasn't too heavy in the trees, I planned to start her on branching. Chapter 12, The Molt of a Warrior. So, Moss said, flying out of his hollow, I see your Tachahanja has arrived. I made a scathing sound deep in my throat. You're not alone, Moss said. Her showing up is enough to put the entire forest on edge. Shh, I said as I picked up the first heartbeats of what I was certain was a white-footed mouse. Moss tilted his head to scoop up the tiny footfalls. We've got competition, he said. What? A snowy. I know the wing beats. Suddenly, out of the thickly falling snow, hurled a sooty sphere with wings. Thora? They're coming. It's an attack. Who? What? Ice Talon commandos with fire claws. Fire claws? No decent owl fought with fire claws. They were Groznik forbidden, dirty weapons. Thora was armed to the beak. She had battle claws, a scimitar in one talon, and a billyhook in the other. They stole embers from my forge to load their claws. They're coming. Moss and I both hooted the alarm calls of our species. The snowy alarm is like a hot needle piercing the air, while my own is a hollow warble in a higher frequency. Within seconds, the small forest was at our end of Stormfast Island, was shrieking. Then, like fiends from Hagsmire, the enemy swooped down on us. Their faces were emblazoned with the double red crescents, the sign of their so-called sacred force. Baktahar Bilaric, they screeched as they'd raised the tips of their glowing fire claws in the name of Bilaric. Their battle cry did not frighten me, but it did sicken me. I felt my gizzard boil. I was ready to fight as savagely as any creature on earth. It was as if I had instantly molted into a new bird, almost unrecognizable to myself. How my heart did pound. I felt nothing except rage, cool rage that left my brain clear. I was able to make a quick assessment of the battlefield, where they were and what they were fighting with. Some were armed with scimitars, others with hot blades, hooks, thorns, and all manner of weapons, including ice blades. Somehow their ice looked slightly different from the shards we saw harvested at the ice dagger. Elfstrom, the large snowy from a neighboring tree, was back from the front and leaped into the air to engage a burrowing owl. Burrowing owls are not the best flyers. Their long, featherless legs are made for digging, and this one appeared to be digging at the air as if it were soil. In the process, he dropped his ice splinter. I swooped down and retrieved it. It was light and didn't throw me off balance at all. I had seen owls practicing with the splinters on Darkfowl and knew you could hurl an ice splinter or use it for a talon-to-talon combat. I decided to hurl this one. As soon as I saw a space between Elfstrom and the burrowing owl open up, I raised my talon, aimed for the owl's chest, and flung it. A spurt of blood smeared the night. The owl plummeted towards the ground. On your tail, Lies! I smelled singed feathers. My feathers! A barred owl with fire claws had attacked me from the rear. I operated on pure instinct and began back winging it, then flipped myself tail first into a small snowdrift and smothered the smoldering sparks. It was a contour or covering feather that had caught fire, and luckily not one of my philos. Brilliant, a familiar voice called from above. I looked up. I was under my hollow's tree, and directly above me, a creature was swinging something that looked like a scaled flail. It was Gilda. She had transformed her head into a weapon and was swinging it at ice talon owls. But there was no time to marvel. I saw Thora and Moss together fending off a threesome of barn owls. There was a dead great gray nearby on the ground, his fire claws hissing softly in the snow as the coals in their tips expired. Beside him lay an ice scimitar 4 times the size of the splinter I'd hurled. I seized it with both my claws, then transferred it to my port talon. I realized immediately that I would have to compensate for its waste by stroking harder than my starboard wing. But I flew towards the rear of the 3 barn owls as fast as I could. They were flying in a tight formation, their wings almost touching, and they didn't see me, but Moss and Thor saw it all. I lifted the scimitar and came down hard with it in the tight spaces between 2 of the owls. They screeched, and 2 tawny wings fell to the ground. Their owners plummeted after. The 3rd owl turned and opened his eyes wide with fear, but before he could maneuver, Thor and Moss were on him. They ripped open his back and tore off his tail. Moss's eyes glazed over with a look of absolute horror. Your tree! Your tree! He shrieked. There was a loud cracking sound and then a sweet smell. The tree burst into flames, fire leaping towards the sky and scorching the night. Lysa! I shrieked and flew straight towards the fiery hollow. The sound of owls battling receded behind me. I had only one thought in my mind: save my sister. The tree hissed and spat as boiling sap escaped from the trunk and branches. A dark mouth seemed to widen before me. It was the hollow spewing black smoke. I flew in but could not breathe. I instinctively backed out. There simply was not enough air, but I was determined to try again. I'd find another way. I'd tear a hole in the trunk on the back side if I had to. The awful odor of seared feathers mixed now with the sweetness of the sap. I flew through the branches of the pine, desperate to find a back way into my family's hollow, choking and shrieking in horror. Then I felt something raking me from the tree. There was the cool draft of air in my lungs, and that was the last I remembered. He's coming around, I heard someone whisper. I could still smell the sickeningly sweet odor of boiling sap from the burning tree. My eyes blinked open. Elfstrom was bending over me, his yellow eyes bright and anxious, in a white face now black with soot. Thora's and Moss's face were also darkened from the ashes and smoke. I tried to speak, but began coughing and couldn't get a word out. Don't try to talk. Elfstrom patted me with his wing as gently as possible, for he still wore his battle claws. I shut my eyes and concentrated as hard as I could, tried not to cough. Finally I gasped, Lysa. I saw Elfstrom glance nervously at Moss. Gilda slithered up to me. Her head had resumed its normal contours, and tears rolled out of both of her eyes. She's gone, Lys. They snatched her? No, dear. She shook her head wearily. She's dead. A revulsion pulsed through me. My gizzard quaked. Dead? Lysa can't be dead. She just budged. I was going to teach her to fly. It was all so wrong. Gundifer, too, Gilda said. It was the smoke. They suffocated in the hollow, and you nearly did, too. Moss began to speak. Gilda got you out and dragged you. I went back in for Lysa. I found her, but it was too late. You found her? In Gundifer. She nodded slightly to one side. I twisted my head. There they lay. Next to Gundifer's rather large body, Lysa was nothing more than a little dark lump in the snow. All her lovely tawny feathers that had just begun to budge were an awful sooty color. And Gundifer had been a handsome spotted owl, but now not one of her spots showed through the black. Her sister Pryla stood over her, weeping, but it was the sight of Tachahanja that made me shut my eyes. She had nary a scorched feather, not a trace of ash in her plumage. How had she escaped while the rest? I didn't finish the thought. She was hunched over Lysa's tiny body, weeping clamorously. I couldn't look. I had to try and remember Lysa's tawny feathers, and the gray ones, and the flecks of white feathers that would have soon appeared over her eyes. Mom was wrong, I thought. A pine tree isn't the safest tree in the forest. It was the sap that caused it to ignite. And Lysa had passed over that border between earth and Glamora. The echoes of her churring voice when she laughed at my pranks and merry glint in her eyes when she heard me talk of flight, all these I would keep precious and bright. I would polish them as a smith polishes metalwork to keep the gleam. She was not here on earth with me, but she was somewhere, I thought. The rage that had overtaken my gizzard and my heart was still inside me. The savage bird within had been unrecognizable to me at first, but he was beginning to feel quite familiar. I slipped into his plumage as easily as during a spring molt, for the season of the soldier had arrived, and I was ready to tap that boiling rage again. The Cadet's Moon. Chapter 13. The Academy. Moss's sister had all survived. Their hollow was not in a pine tree, which had turned out to be a veritable fire trap. My parents returned soon after the tragic attack. They had seen a lot, but never anything quite like this, never an attack on broodies and children. My mother was stunned. She kept hopping around in the charred debris of the tree, as if she were searching for some tiny remnant, a toy, perhaps even an old yarped pellet of Lysa's, of her youngest chick. My father followed her, and every now and then he would pat her with his wingtip and try to murmur soothing words, but there was nothing he could say. The war had changed in a way that no one had ever anticipated. No longer did warrior meet warrior on a neutral field. Bileric had come to our peaceful forest and savaged it. The battle in our forest had been won by what my Da called a few good owls, and he included me in that small coterie. Moss and Thora and I had distinguished ourselves. After all, we were very young owls and had not yet experienced any kind of combat on this scale, nor had we any kind of combat training. My parents' devastation at the loss of their first daughter was eased by their pride in me. A real soldier, this one, my Da would boom, and my Mom's yellow eyes would glitter fiercely. A commando, if I ever saw one, she proclaimed. Moss, Thora, and I flew to Dark Fowl soon after the attack. We realized our childhood was finished. I had the feeling that Thora's had been finished long before. The news of the attack had reverberated throughout the Killian League, and nowhere was it more evident than in Dark Fowl. The island bustled with activity. The smiths did not sleep. Their fires burned both day and night. The honing pit that had added snakes who worked in shifts through the days and nights. The military academy on Dark Fowl gave us no time to grieve. There was so much to learn, and we were busy constantly. With the attack on Stormfast, the war had escalated, and we were only the first of many attacks on civilians, settlements to come. It was not easy for a young owl to arrive for training with a bit of history behind him. At least that's the way it was with three of us, Moss, Thora, and myself. Everyone had heard about the attack on Stormfast. Expectations were running high for us, uncomfortably high. It was especially tough for Thora, who really had no desire to train as a cadet. She wanted to learn smithing and apprentice Orf. She would settle for an apprenticeship with no other smiths. There had never been a female smith in the history of the northern kingdoms. It was not a promising situation. I cringed when she asked one of our instructors once if she might take some training to work at the forge. A forge, the barn owl, who was a female, screeched. Are you yonkers? Females are not smith material, not at all, never have. And it was a female squawking at poor Thora. It was shocking to me how rigid the instructors and officers of the Killian League were. Shocking and disheartening, for none of them seemed to have much imagination. They never entertained the idea that there might be other ways of doing things. The elite commando units were very specialized in the types of raids they implemented and the kind of weapons they used. I wanted to do it all: sabotage, surveillance, reconnaissance. I was very interested in military strategy in general. Serving in a commando unit, no matter how elite, seemed limiting to me. But cadets couldn't pick and choose what they wanted to do or what they felt their strengths were. There was a rigid curriculum, and any picking and choosing was done by the regimental commander of the academy. That was a barred owl named Optimus Strix Varia. He was a stern old owl, and although he was missing 3 of his 4 talons on his port foot, he was skillful with fizz gigs and fizz blisters. These spiked iron spheres on the end of lightweight chains were among the most challenging of weapons to manipulate. Inside the fizz blisters were hot coals that made them even more difficult, for if the owl wielding the weapon made the slightest mistake, he could ignite his own feathers. But the fizz blisters could be lethal. An attacking owl could scoop into an enemy formation and scatter it with one twirl of the weapon. There was a releasing mechanism on the chain that had to be operated with great precision. Experts with fizz blisters could hurl them great distances. Timing was everything. Moss, Thor, and I settled into our barracks in the outcropping of lithite rocks and began to make friends with our fellow cadets. The most memorable were Blix, a tiny northern saw-wheat, and Loki, a great gray. They had known each other since they were fledglings and made quite a pair, as Blix didn't even come up to Loki's knees. But they were fast friends. When I first met them, I could not help but notice that Loki's wingtips were a bit tattered, as if he had bashed them up somehow. I remember saying, "Looks like you have already seen some combat." The 2 friends exchanged almost guilty glances. "Oh, it's nothing," Loki had said quickly. "I just got a scrape on these fresh feathers." "Oh, yes," I said. I realized it was a source of embarrassment to Loki, and I dropped the subject. That can happen. What interested me the most about Blix and Loki was that they came from a region in the northernmost reaches of the Bitter Sea, in fact, very close to Shagdasnurl, the coldest and darkest place on earth. But it was not the Shagdasnurl that intrigued me. It was the place at its very center called Nacht Stead, where my mother had told me the winds were hatched. "Have you ever seen a wind hatch?" I asked the great gray and the northern saw-wait. "Of course," they both said at once. "We have a celebration with the Kitbits when the Kitbits come," Blix explained. "Skyboshing?" Thora asked. "It's great fun. You ride the backside and bosh of a curlwind." You ride the Kitbits?" I asked. I was astounded. "Sure we do," Blix replied. "But you're so tiny," Thora gasped. "I won't take offense at that," the saw-wheat said and squared her shoulders, "but actually being small makes it easier." "I have a question," I said slowly. The serious note in my voice caught their attention. "We've been at the academy for 3 days and have been told about all sorts of classes and exercises to turn us into skillful warriors, but no one has ever mentioned anything about weather." "What about weather?" Moss asked. "I mean, weather interpretation, analysis. Think how helpful that would be to planning battle strategies." "Well, I don't mean to brag," Loki said, "but they say no owl flies better than owls from Shagdasnurl." He spread his enormous wings and lofted into flight to begin a series of beautiful curling loops. Then he alighted on the ground again. Blix turned to him. "You might not mean to brag, Loki, but that was bragging." But she said this with good cheer. One could tell that they were used to pulling each other's feathers. Are there any flight instructors here at the academy from Shagda? There used to be one, I think, Blick said thoughtfully, but she died a long time ago. That brings up another question, Thora snapped. There was an edge to her voice that we hadn't heard before. Got a burr in your plummels? Moss asked. Wrong question, I thought. Yes, as a matter of fact, I do. What is it? I asked cautiously. Blix mentioned a flight instructor, a she. There are several female instructors of note here, I believe. There is a colonel who commands the Frostbeaks, a pearl-spotted pygmy, Essa glaucustum perlatum. She commands the A unit of the Frostbeaks. I hope I get into A unit because B unit is headed up by Colonel Stellan Microthene Whitney, who is about as haggish as an elf owl ever gets. A nasty piece of work, that one. What's your point, Thora? I asked as gently as possible. My point is this. There are several female instructors and commanders. Your own mother, Lice, heads up the Ice Dagger unit and was an instructor here at the academy before that. But there's not one blacksmith on the island of Darkfowl who is female, not one rogue smith in the entire northern kingdoms who is female. I have no interest in fighting, in becoming a warrior, serving in some elite commando unit, but I do have a great interest in learning how to smith weapons these units employ in battle. When I mentioned that I wanted to study smithing and served as an apprentice of Orf, the regimental commander nearly lost his gizzard. He did? I asked. Yeah, he did. She paused as if to remember. I really think I almost killed him when I said that. The others were finding this entire story rather humorous, but I began to think about it. I think, Thora continued reflectively, that the academy has a rather narrow view of things. I mean, as Blix and Loki mentioned, the best flyers come from the Shagda Snurl, but none of the flight instructors are from there. And think about the rocks that melt in the volcanoes, the flames that must make those rocks melt. What kind of coals might they produce for a smith's forge? Ice weapons from the dagger are said to be superior to any that are harvested from the shag, but maybe the harvesters are looking for the wrong kind of ice. Seems to me that we should be sending owls to research up there. My mum lost her eye to an ice splinter, I said, but my father said it was crudely honed. They thought it was inferior ice from up around the shag, but I'm beginning to wonder if it was inferior, or if they don't know how to make a proper cold coal with those coals from the volcano up there at the Notchstead. Precisely, Thora said. If someone knew how to use those coals properly, well, it could be very dangerous for the Killian League. You know what? Blix often began her comments this way. She was a very reflective owl. What? Thora asked. Well, Blix said, with your interest in coals and lies in weather, you should come up to Shagda Snurl for the holidays. Could we? I said excitedly. I could think of nothing better. What was home for me now, anyway? The charred remains of the slender pine, the memory of Lysa. As far as I knew, Mum and Da were back at the front already. They usually were in the summer months. It would be a dream come true for me to go to the place where the winds hatched. I felt it might be a place of inspiration. This war would never end unless some new ideas were born, but who would listen to a bunch of young owls like ourselves? The more I thought about it, the more ideas I had. A delegation should be sent to Shagda to recruit great flyers and study the winds. Smiths should be sent to the volcanoes to examine the coals. Some should be sent to the land called the Beyond to see how the colliers retrieved coals from the ember beds of the sacred volcanoes there. If Bylaric had turned into an orphan maker, the front was coming closer every night. There wasn't much time before the Killian League would be overrun. Already there were rumors that our class would be fast-tracked to graduate early and head immediately out to the front.